Imagine a woman in a plain black dress stepping through the marble corridors of New York, not as a guest, but as a quiet storm. In her gloved hands, she carries a battered ledger, its corners softened by years of calculation, its pages dense with the arithmetic of opportunity. She eats simply, saves ruthlessly, and negotiates with a stillness that unnerves rooms full of men who speak too loudly. When markets tremble and banks whisper the language of panic, they do something unthinkable. For their pride, they approach the widow in black. Her reply is measured, her terms exact. Money to her is not ornament or spectacle. It is leverage, it is freedom, it is the last word. She is richer than the families who mock her and more liquid than the houses that shun her. She rents modest rooms, walks in worn shoes, studies balance sheets by lamplight, and refuses silk where others demand ceremony. The newspapers call her a witch for the sin of being a woman who will not perform poverty to comfort the rich, nor perform wealth to entertain the crowd. She does not smile for the audience, she does not apologize for profit, and she does not spend a dollar to prove that she has it. In a city addicted to display, she is the exception that breaks the habit. Every coin she does not spend becomes a soldier in a private army marching toward railroads, real estate bonds, and the quiet purchase of influence. The paradox is stark. The poorest-looking woman on Wall Street may be the only one who owns it outright. This is the story of Hetty Green, the widow who turned thrift into power, who turned ridicule into armor, and who built an empire by refusing the performance of luxury. If wealth is a mask, she chose to remove it. The 19th century in America was a theater of contrasts. The Civil War had ended, the railroads were stitching the continent together, and New York City was transforming into the nerve center of finance. The air smelled of iron coal and ambition. Families like the Astors, Vanderbilts, and Morgans displayed their fortunes in glittering mansions along Fifth Avenue, draping themselves in diamonds and hosting dinners with 12 courses each, a declaration of dominance. But against this backdrop of excess stood a solitary figure, Hetty Green. Born Henrietta Howland Robinson in 1834, she was the daughter of a wealthy whaling family from New Bedford, Massachusetts. Unlike other girls of her class, Hetty did not spend her youth in embroidery or social dances. Instead, she was sent to live with her grandfather, a stern Quaker who taught her the language of ledgers. By the age of 6, she was reading financial reports aloud. By 13, she was managing accounts. While others learned to charm, Hetty learned to calculate. Society was not prepared for her. Wall Street was an arena almost exclusively reserved for men, where speculation was measured in cigars smoked and boasts exchanged. For a woman to enter this space without apology was scandalous. But Hetty did more than enter. She competed, and often she won. She had a talent for spotting undervalued assets, buying when others fled, and holding when others panicked. Still, what fascinated and scandalized the public was not only her skill, but her refusal to spend. She rented small, unfashionable rooms instead of gilded apartments. She wore the same black dress until the fabric thinned. She traveled by streetcar when millionaires favored private carriages. To her contemporaries, this was not merely eccentric, it was incomprehensible. How could the richest woman in America choose to live like the poorest? Yet that very refusal became her shield. In a culture obsessed with appearances, Hetty made invisibility her strategy. The world saw miserliness, she saw discipline. They mocked her thrift, she transformed it into empire. Hetty Green was not born poor, but the way she chose to build and protect her wealth made her an outsider in the eyes of the very class she belonged to. After the death of her father, Hetty inherited close to $1 million, a staggering sum in the mid-19th century. But she did not squander it on social status or domestic opulence. Instead, she reinvested, strategized, and sharpened her instincts. Her weapon of choice was the bond market, and her timing was legendary. When others feared war, Hetty bought government bonds at rock-bottom prices. When railroads fell into chaos, she purchased them piece by piece. When banks collapsed, she moved like a lender of last resort, but only on her own exacting terms. She often insisted on collateral that bankers found insulting and interest rates that made even seasoned financiers wince. But they paid. Because in times of crisis, Hetty had what others didn't cash. She studied bankruptcy like a surgeon studies anatomy. Where others saw failure, she saw undervaluation. She bought distressed properties, foreclosed mortgages, and municipal bonds nobody else wanted. In one infamous episode, she loaned New York City millions of dollars during a financial panic at rates that made the mayor sweat. But her daring wasn't confined to finance. When her husband, Edward Green, mismanaged money and brought lawsuits to their name, Hetty didn't defend him. She legally separated their finances, a rare move for a woman of her era, and kept her empire intact while his dwindled. In a society that expected women to be soft, loyal, and ornamental, Hetty was calculating, autonomous, and indifferent to opinion. Her children, too, were raised in the shadow of this strategy. Her son, Ned Green, would one day become a financier in his own right, but not without enduring his mother's frugal schooling. In one legendary incident, she refused to pay for a proper doctor to treat Ned's injured leg. The limb eventually had to be amputated. Some called it cruelty. Others saw it as proof of her iron creed, waste nothing. Hetty Green's rise was not smooth, and it was never polite. But every insult she absorbed from newspapers calling her a witch to socialites, refusing her dinner invitations, became a kind of fuel. She didn't need their approval. She had their money. New York's elite didn't know what to make of Hetty Green. She was richer than most of them, perhaps richer than all of them, yet she refused to play the part. No demons, no balls, no soirees. Instead, she lived in cheap boarding houses under false names, carried her lunch in a brown bag, and argued with the shopkeepers over pennies. The press was relentless. They called her the miser, the hag of finance, and most famously, the Witch of Wall Street. Her appearance didn't help, always in black, thin-lipped, and sharp-eyed. Hetty seemed like a character pulled from a Gothic novel rather than a Fifth Avenue salon. She rejected fashion, mocked society's obsession with appearances, and refused to perform femininity for the comfort of others. The more they mocked her, the stronger her legend grew. Cartoons depicted her hoarding gold in a vault. Rumors spread that she ate cold oatmeal to save on heating bills and reused envelopes to avoid the cost of stationery. She did little to deny any of it because every exaggeration only amplified her aura of control. What her critics missed was that Hetty had in fact mastered something they had in financial invisibility. She could not be blackmailed by fashion or society. No scandal could threaten her position. No banker could shame her into a risky investment. By refusing luxury, she refused vulnerability. Yet even her allies struggled to understand her discipline. Her son Ned, now wealthy in his own right, surrounded himself with grand estates, jewels, and women. Hetty disapproved. "He has no idea what money means," she once said. But even as she criticized him, she continued to grow the family fortune quietly, methodically. There was a paradox at play. She had more wealth than most queens, but lived more humbly than most clerks. This dissonance invited fascination and fear. For in a world obsessed with status, what kind of woman could look power in the eye and decline its velvet costume? Hetty was not just rich, she was untouchable, and that made her dangerous. By the early 1900s, Hetty Green had become more than just a financier. She had become an institution. While her name was rarely etched on the plaques of grand buildings, she held more leverage than many of the bankers whose portraits adorn them. She operated not from a marble office, but from the modest back rooms of banks that owed her money. And when panic struck, as it often did in those volatile decades, they came to her. During financial crises, Hetty played a role few women or even men could imagine. She became the lender of last resort. When entire banks were on the brink of collapse, she offered them lifelines, but always on her terms. No public charity, no grand gesture, just paper contracts, hard interest rates, and complete control. She turned crisis into opportunity with the detachment of a surgeon. And while others diversified their wealth into visible trophies, yachts, diamonds, titles, Hetty consolidated hers into control. She owned bond stocks, mortgages, and city debts, often under pseudonyms. Her influence was deep layered and deliberately opaque. She became what modern economists might call a shadow bank, though in her time she was simply known as the woman who could break you with a signature. The nickname, the Witch of Wall Street, began as mockery. But over time, it took on an aura of reverence. Like a sorceress who knew how to read the secret language of numbers, she saw patterns others missed, predicted collapses, others ignored, and preserved her wealth through cycles that ruined titans. Yet Hetty never opened a bank, never ran a firm, never sat on a board. She didn't need to. The world came to her. In an age where men built towers to prove their power, she built silence. Where they used brass and marble, she used discipline and time. She outlived most of her critics, outperformed most of her rivals, and outlasted most of the institutions that once dismissed her. No crown, no empire, no palace. Just one woman, a black dress, and a mind sharper than steel. When Hetty Green died in 1916 at the age of 81, she left behind an estate estimated at over $100 million, equivalent to more than $2.5 billion today. But there were no golden caskets, no marble mausoleums, no grand ceremonies. She passed away as she had lived quietly, stubbornly, and on her own terms. The press rushed to summarize her life with the only lens they knew: money. They marveled at the fortune she had amassed, speculated on the oddities of her final days, and debated whether she had died wealthy or merely wealth hoarding. But what they missed or refused to acknowledge was the deeper legacy she left behind. Hetty Green had proved that discipline could outmaneuver spectacle, that silence could outlast noise, and that a woman could master the world of capital without ever asking for permission. She didn't change who she was to fit into the system. She forced the system to bend around her. Her estate passed largely to her two children, Ned and Sylvia, both of whom in their own ways abandoned the frugality their mother had clung to. Ned became a flamboyant collector of art jewels and mistresses. Sylvia, although more discreet, lived comfortably, donating portions of the fortune to libraries and causes. But neither could replicate Hetty's strategic genius or her intimate relationship with money as command, not consumption. And yet Hetty Green remains an enigma, a woman who wielded financial power on a scale few men dared, but refused to play the social game that power often demands. She was mocked for her clothes, her stubbornness, her coldness. But she didn't seek admiration, she sought control. There is a haunting paradox at the heart of her story. A woman who could have owned any castle chose a rented room. A mother who built an empire let her son lose a leg to save a dollar. A titan of finance who rejected the theater of wealth, and in doing so became one of its most unforgettable legends. When we remember Hetty Green, we do not remember silk or splendor. We remember steel wrapped in linen. What does it mean to be rich if you refuse to appear so? What is power if it is wielded silently? And what is freedom if it does not glitter? Hetty Green forces us to ask uncomfortable questions, not only about money, but about identity, control, and the theater of success. In an age obsessed with lifestyle, she stripped wealth to its purest essence, not a show, but a shield. She lived with fewer illusions than her peers. Where others chased applause, she chased compound interest. Where they decorated halls, she fortified holdings. She understood, perhaps more deeply than any of them, that the performance of wealth often leads to its erosion. Appearances are a liability. Applause fades. But ownership, quiet, boring, absolute ownership, is eternal. In a world where the rich are expected to be glamorous and women are expected to be pleasing, Hetty Green was neither, and for that she was hated. But in being hated, she was also free. If there is a lesson in her story, it is this: to those who are willing to be misunderstood, even despised, the world offers a unique form of power, a power that does not beg or decorate or defend itself, a power that sits quietly in the corner and waits for its moment. And when that moment comes, it doesn't raise its voice. It signs the check.